I wasn't snooping, at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the moment I flipped open that leather-bound journal, I felt my stomach tighten. What started as innocent curiosity turned into something I wish I'd never uncovered. It started on a quiet Sunday morning. I was cleaning out the storage room, one of those finally getting around to it tasks. The room had been untouched for months, crammed with boxes we hadn't opened since moving in 5 years ago. My wife, Emily, had been unusually absent that weekend, off on one of her many girl trips with her friends. I didn't mind. It gave me time to catch up on chores and clear my mind from work. I worked my way through the room, tossing old clothes into donation piles and stacking up books we'd never read. That's when I found it, a small, dusty box tucked behind a pile of holiday decorations. It didn't look familiar, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were a few keepsakes, photographs, a necklace I didn't recognize, and, buried beneath it all, a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, as if it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. Something about it felt personal, too personal. For a moment, I hesitated. I knew what this was. Emily had never mentioned keeping a journal, but everyone has their little secrets, right? I could have just put it back. I should have just put it back. But instead, I sat down on the floor, opened the first page, and started reading. The handwriting was hers, neat, precise, with little flourishes at the ends of certain letters. At first, the entries seemed harmless. Daily musings about her work, our life together, random thoughts. I couldn't help but smile at the little notes about me. Things like Daniel doesn't even realize how cute he looks when he's lost in thought. It was sweet, even touching. But then a few pages in, the tone shifted. It started subtly. She wrote about feeling lonely, about how my long work hours left her with too much time to think. There were mentions of frustrations I didn't even know she had. It's like we're just two people sharing a house sometimes. He's here, but he's not here. I felt a pang of guilt reading that. It wasn't untrue. Work had consumed most of my time lately. But what really caught my attention was a name that started appearing in her entries. Had lunch with Liam today. He's so easy to talk to. He just gets me in a way Daniel doesn't sometimes. Liam. The name didn't ring a bell. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just a friend, a colleague. But as I flipped through more pages, his name kept showing up. Liam said the funniest thing today. I can't believe how much I laughed. It felt good. Another late night for Daniel. Liam texted me just to check in. It's nice to feel seen. I closed the journal abruptly, my heart pounding. My mind raced with questions. Who was this guy? How long had she been writing about him? Was it just a friend, or was it more? I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the journal in my hands. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but deep down, I felt a sinking suspicion that this wasn't just a harmless friendship. Something about the way she described him felt different. I shoved the journal back into the box and pushed it into the corner of the room. I wasn't ready to confront what I'd just read. Not yet. But one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore this. Not now. The journal sat exactly where I had left it, in the dusty box tucked behind a stack of paint cans. I told myself I wouldn't touch it again, that I didn't need to. But no matter how hard I tried to move on, the words inside it lingered in my mind, echoing like a constant, taunting whisper. Chris kissed me today. I didn't want him to stop. I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow it. For days, I tried to act normal. I went to work, answered emails, even cracked a few jokes with my coworkers. But every night when I came home, I felt like I was walking into a house that wasn't mine anymore. Sarah didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but she didn't say anything. She seemed different. Now that I was paying attention, everything about her felt like a clue. There were the late-night texts. I didn't think much of them at first. Sarah often texted her friends or talked about work projects. But now, every time her phone buzzed, I found myself watching her. Sometimes she'd glance at the screen and quickly put it down like she didn't want me to see. Other times, she'd leave the room entirely, claiming she needed to grab something from the kitchen or take a call in private. Then there were the absences. Sarah had always been social, but lately, her outings seemed more frequent. She'd mention brunches, meetings, even last-minute errands that didn't quite add up. Where are you going? I asked one evening as she slipped on her coat. Oh, Just meeting Amanda for dinner, she replied casually, her tone perfectly neutral. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the journal had cracked something inside me. And now, every word she said felt like a lie waiting to be uncovered. One night, I couldn't resist anymore. After Sarah had gone to bed, I crept into the guest room and pulled the journal out of the box. My hands shook as I untied the leather strap, but I knew I couldn't stop myself. I flipped past the pages I'd already read, my stomach tightening with every turn. The next entry was dated just a few months ago. Chris and I had lunch today. He told me I was beautiful, and I believed him. I haven't felt this alive in years. I closed my eyes, gripping the edges of the journal. Lunch? When? Where? My mind raced with possibilities. The next entry hit even harder. Daniel was working late again, so Chris came over. I told myself it was just a talk, but deep down I knew better. The way he touched me, I'll never forget it. The air left my lungs. I sat there, staring at the page, trying to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Was I really so blind? The journal provided no answers, only more questions. But I couldn't keep living in uncertainty. I had to know the truth. The journal was no longer enough. It had given me pieces of the truth, fragments that left me hollow and furious. But I needed more. I needed to see it for myself. For days, I kept a close eye on Sarah. I wasn't proud of it, but the lies written in her journal gave me no choice. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt my chest tighten. Who was she texting? What was she saying? And more importantly, was it him? One night, while Sarah was in the shower, I finally gave in to the temptation. Her phone was sitting on the nightstand, face down as usual. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and tapped the screen. It was locked, of course, but the notification on the lock screen was all I needed. Liam. Looking forward to tomorrow. Same place, same time. My stomach turned. Same place? Same time? What did that mean? I put the phone back exactly where I found it and tried to act normal for the rest of the evening. Sarah came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, smiling like nothing was wrong. Long day? She asked, climbing into bed beside me. Yeah, I muttered, avoiding her eyes. I didn't sleep that night. The words on her phone played over and over in my mind. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I'll know for sure. The next day, I called in sick to work. Sarah left the house around noon, dressed a little too nicely for what she claimed was a casual lunch with Amanda. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I followed her, keeping a safe distance. She drove across town to a small cafe I didn't recognize. Parking a few spaces away, I watched her get out of the car, glancing around nervously before stepping inside. A few minutes later, he arrived. Liam. I didn't need an introduction to know who he was. He was tall, well-dressed, and confident in a way that made my blood boil. He greeted Sarah with a hug. Too long, too close. They sat at a table near the window, leaning in as they talked, their body language telling me everything I needed to know. I stayed in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm in there, to demand answers, to make a scene, but another part of me couldn't move. I watched as they laughed, as she touched his arm, as he looked at her in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like watching someone else's life. They stayed for nearly an hour before leaving together. I followed them to a nearby park, where they walked side by side, their shoulders almost touching. When they sat down on a bench, I saw her rest her head on his shoulder, and something inside me snapped. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I drove home, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The journal had told me part of the story, but now I'd seen it with my own eyes. There was no denying it anymore. Sarah wasn't just writing fantasies, she was living them. And I was on the outside, watching my marriage crumble in real time. When she came home later that evening, I acted like nothing had happened. But inside, I was already planning my next move. The weight of what I had discovered was unbearable. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. Her hand on his, her laugh, the way she leaned in so effortlessly. The image of Sarah with Liam burned in my mind, replaying over and over like a cruel film I couldn't turn off. I tried to carry on like normal, but I wasn't fooling anyone. My coworkers noticed I was quieter, more distant. At home, Sarah asked me more than once if something was wrong. I always gave the same answer. Just work stuff? She didn't press, which only made me more suspicious. The journal had become an obsession. Late at night, when Sarah was asleep, I would pull it out and read it again, poring over every word, every date, every name. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, closure, maybe, or some explanation that would make it all make sense. But the more I read, the angrier I became. One entry in particular stood out. Liam said he wanted to spend the whole weekend with me. I told him I wasn't sure, but deep down I wanna. It's getting harder to lie to Daniel. He's been so distracted lately, I don't think he'd even notice. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. How long had I been blind to this? How many times had I missed the signs because I was too busy, too trusting? Sarah's behavior only added fuel to the fire. A few days after I saw her with Liam, she mentioned she had another brunch with Amanda. Another one? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She's been going through a rough time, Sarah said, brushing it off. We just talk, you know? She needs me. I nodded, but inside I was boiling. That evening, I almost confronted her. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, and I was standing in the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. The words were on the tip of my tongue. I know about Liam. I saw you. How long has this been going on? But I didn't say them. I wasn't ready. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. If Sarah wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I unlocked her laptop. I'd seen her type the password enough times to memorize it, though I never thought I'd need it. Her emails were the first place I checked. At first, everything seemed normal. Work correspondence, updates from friends. But then I found one marked important in her personal folder. Subject: can't wait to see you. From Liam. I opened it, my hands trembling. Friday can't come fast enough. I'll handle the booking. Same place as last time. Just let me know what time you'll be free. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Same place as last time. Booking? My mind raced, piecing together what this meant. I searched her email for anything related to reservations. It didn't take long to find it. A confirmation from a hotel downtown, dated just 2 weeks ago. The reservation was under Sarah's name. A single night. I closed the laptop, my chest tight with rage and heartbreak. This wasn't just casual. It was planned, deliberate. She was living a double life right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. That night, Sarah acted like everything was normal. She kissed me goodnight, said she loved me, and went to bed without a second thought. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, knowing that my next move would change everything. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. Every word from Sarah felt like a lie, every smile a mockery. The hotel reservation haunted me, but I needed to see it for myself. Friday evening, Sarah said she had errands after work. I might be late, she added, giving me a quick kiss. I nodded, but as soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. My heart pounded as I trailed her car. She drove downtown, stopping at the hotel from the reservation. I parked across the street and watched as she stepped out, her outfit too polished for errands. Minutes later, Liam arrived, strolling inside like he owned the place. I stayed in my car, fists clenched on the wheel. I wanted to storm in, but couldn't move. When they left an hour later, Sarah was smiling, and Liam leaned in to whisper something. She laughed. That was it. When she came home that night, I was waiting in the living room. Where were you? I asked. Errands, she said, her voice calm. Don't lie, I snapped, standing up. I know about Liam. I know about the hotel. Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. What are you talking about? I followed you today. I saw you with him. She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. It's not what you think, she whispered. Don't insult me, I said. I read your journal. I saw the emails. I know everything. Her eyes widened in shock, and she sat down, her head in her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said softly. But it did, I said coldly. How long? She looked up, tears in her eyes. A few months. I didn't think it would go this far. I laughed bitterly. You didn't think? You planned hotel stays. You wrote about him like he's the love of your life. I was lonely, Daniel, she said. You were always at work. I felt invisible. Don't blame this on me, I shot back. I was working for us. For our future. She broke down, but I couldn't feel sympathy. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't say anything, I replied, turning toward the stairs. I need time to think. I left her sitting there, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on both of us. The days after our confrontation passed in a blur. I couldn't stop replaying her confession in my mind. Her tears, her excuses, the way she tried to shift the blame onto me. Every moment of our marriage felt like it had been rewritten, every happy memory tainted by the knowledge of what she had done. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed. Instead, I spent the nights on the couch, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of how we'd ended up here. Sarah made a few attempts to talk to me, to apologize, but I couldn't handle her words. One night, she sat down beside me, her hands trembling. I know I hurt you, she said quietly. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I didn't look at her. If this is what love looks like, Sarah, I'm not sure I want it. She didn't respond, and after a moment, she got up and went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of this mess. After hesitating for hours, I called my brother, Eric. Daniel, he said after I explained everything, his voice heavy with concern. I don't even know what to say. Are you okay? No, I admitted. I feel like I don't know her anymore. Like the woman I married is gone. Eric was quiet for a moment. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you need to figure out what you want. Can you see yourself forgiving her? Or is this something you can't come back from? I don't know, I said honestly. I don't even know where to start. Start by getting the full picture, he said firmly. If you're going to make a decision, you need to know exactly what you're dealing with. Don't let her control the narrative. His words stayed with me long after I hung up. If I was going to figure out what came next, I needed to know everything. The next morning, I waited until Sarah left for work before diving into her laptop again. I scoured her emails, her messages, even her browser history, searching for anything that could fill in the gaps. That's when I found it. A string of messages between Sarah and Liam that painted a much clearer picture of their relationship. Dates, times, places, everything was there. One message in particular stood out. Liam, I'm tired of hiding Sarah. You deserve better than this. Just leave him. She hadn't responded, but the timestamp told me the message had been sent just days before our confrontation. I leaned back in the chair, my head spinning. Liam wasn't just some fling. He wanted more from her, something permanent, and maybe she was considering it. For the first time since this all began, I felt like I was starting to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. But the question remained, could I ever forgive her? The fog in my head was finally lifting. The shock, the heartbreak, the endless questions. I was done being a victim of Sarah's betrayal. If I wanted closure, if I wanted to regain control, I had to act. The first step was finding out who Liam really was. I knew his name, his face, and the fact that he had no problem sleeping with another man's wife. But I needed more. While Sarah was at work, I dug into his online presence. Social media, LinkedIn, public records, everything I could find. It didn't take long to uncover a picture of his life. A mid-level manager at a marketing firm, divorced, no kids, active on Instagram, where he posted gym selfies and pictures of fancy dinners. He seemed proud of the life he was building, arrogantly so. Then I hit something interesting. Buried in the comments of one of his older posts was a message from a woman named Grace. It was innocuous, just a thank you for helping her with that favor. But it was enough to make me curious. Who was Grace, and what had Liam done for her? After some more digging, I discovered Grace was one of Liam's co-workers. A few discreet messages to people in her professional network revealed that Liam had a bit of a reputation. He'd been involved in several office affairs, each one messier than the last. I wasn't surprised. Armed with this information, I started planning. If Liam thought he could waltz into my life and take what wasn't his, he had another thing coming. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to sense the shift in me. She'd been trying to talk to me more, making tentative attempts to reconnect. Do you want to have dinner together tonight? She asked one evening, standing awkwardly in the kitchen. Not really, I replied without looking up from my laptop. Her shoulders slumped, but she didn't push. Instead, she left the room, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. I almost felt bad. Almost. The next day, I made my move. Using what I'd learned about Liam's work, I arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a potential business deal. It was easy to do. His firm was always looking for new clients, and I had connections in his industry. I sent him an email through one of my business accounts, proposing a meeting at a coffee shop downtown. He replied almost immediately, eager and professional. The irony of him walking into this trap without realizing who had said it was almost laughable. When the day of the meeting arrived, I got there early, choosing a table in the corner where I could see the entrance. I didn't have to wait long. Liam walked in, dressed in a tailored suit and wearing that same smug confidence I'd seen in the photos. He spotted me and approached, holding out his hand. "Daniel, right? Thanks for reaching out." I stood, shaking his hand. He didn't recognize me. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, gesturing for him to sit. We exchanged pleasantries, talking briefly about business, but I could see him sizing me up. He had no idea who I was or what I knew. Then, after a few minutes, I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "So, Liam," I said, my tone sharp, "how's Sarah?" The color drained from his face. The meeting with Liam had left me shaken, but strangely satisfied. Seeing the fear in his eyes, watching his confidence crumble, it gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in weeks. But as I drove home, the reality of my situation hit me again. Liam wasn't the real problem. Sarah was. When I walked through the door, Sarah was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner. She looked up and gave me a tentative smile. "Hey," she said softly, as if testing the waters. "Hey," I replied, brushing past her and heading for the living room. I could feel her eyes on me as I sat down on the couch, turning on the TV without even glancing her way. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I spoke to her only when necessary, answering her questions with short, clipped responses. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, but I wasn't ready to have the conversation she clearly wanted. Finally, one evening, she broke the silence. "Daniel," she said, standing in the doorway of the living room. "We need to talk. Please." I didn't respond at first, keeping my eyes on the TV. "Daniel," she repeated, her voice trembling. I can't do this anymore. If we're going to have any chance of fixing this, we need to talk." I turned to look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked like a shadow of the woman I'd married. "Fine," I said, turning off the TV. "Talk." She sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "You deserve that. You deserve the truth." "Damn right, I do," I said coldly. She flinched at my tone but nodded. "It started a few months ago. I wasn't looking for anything, I swear. I felt so alone, Daniel. You were always at work, always distracted. And then Liam started paying attention to me. He listened to me, made me feel seen." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay quiet. "It was innocent at first," she continued. "Just talking. But then it became more. I didn't mean for it to happen, but—" "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare say you didn't mean for it to happen. You made a choice, Sarah. Every step of the way, you chose this." Her lip quivered, but she didn't argue. "I thought we were happy," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "I thought we had something real. But apparently, I was just convenient for you." "That's not true," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Daniel. I always have. Loves." I laughed bitterly. "This is your idea of love? Sneaking around, lying to my face, humiliating me. I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. "I made a mistake, but I never stopped loving you." Her words only made me angrier. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store, Sarah. What you did was deliberate." She broke down completely, her face buried in her hands. For a moment, I just sat there, watching her, feeling nothing but anger and exhaustion. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered through her tears. "Maybe you can't," I said, standing up. "Maybe this can't be fixed." I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, needing to get away before I said something I regret. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, the weight of everything pressed down on me. I didn't know where we went from here, if there was even a way forward. Back at the house, Sarah was left alone, sobbing in the empty living room. The road stretched endlessly before me as I drove without purpose, trying to outrun the whirlwind of emotions that Sarah's confession had unleashed. Anger, betrayal, sadness. They collided inside me, leaving me hollow and exhausted. After what felt like hours, I pulled over at a quiet overlook, the city lights twinkling in the distance below. I sat there, staring out at the horizon, trying to make sense of everything. The life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in was gone. It wasn't just Sarah's betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that I'd built my future on a foundation that had been crumbling for years without me noticing. For the first time, I questioned what I was holding on to. Was it love? Habit? Or was I just too scared to start over? The thought lingered as I rested my head against the steering wheel, the cold air seeping through the cracked window. I stayed there until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, then reluctantly drove home. The house was dark and quiet when I walked inside. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the kitchen, where a single sheet of paper sat on the table. My name was written on it in Sarah's familiar handwriting. I hesitated, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to rip it up without reading it, but something made me sit down. Slowly, I unfolded the letter. Daniel, I don't know how to start this because I know there's nothing I can say to make this right. But I need you to understand how deeply I regret what I've done. I've spent the past few hours replaying every moment of our lives together, wondering how I could have been so selfish and blind. You didn't deserve this, and I know I've hurt you in ways that I may never be able to fix. There are no excuses for what I did. It was wrong, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that I love you, Daniel. I always have. What I did had nothing to do with you, and everything to do with my own insecurities and failures. I don't expect forgiveness, but if there's even a small chance we can rebuild what we had, I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, honesty, time, whatever you need, I'll give it. If this is the end, I'll accept it, but losing you would be the greatest regret of my life. I'm so sorry. More than words can ever express. Her handwriting faltered near the end, shaky and uneven, as if she'd been crying while writing it. I set the letter down, my mind racing. It was raw and honest, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of something I couldn't define. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it wasn't the same searing anger I'd been carrying, either. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, the quiet of the house pressing down on me. A part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow salvage the wreckage of our marriage. But another part of me wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. When the sun began to rise, casting faint light through the kitchen window, I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer. I wasn't ready to decide. Not yet. The letter from Sarah haunted me. Her words echoed in my mind as I went through the motions of my days, trapped between the comfort of familiarity and the abyss of betrayal. Every time I looked at her, I saw flashes of the life we once had, tainted by the reality of what she'd done. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah approached me on the porch. I've been sitting there more often lately, finding solace in the quiet rustle of the trees and the distant hum of passing cars. "Can I sit with you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. For a while, we sat in silence, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she broke the stillness. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "About us, about what I did." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I know I destroyed something precious," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. But I want to try to fix this, Daniel. I want to try to be better." "Why now?" I asked, my gaze fixed on the darkening sky. Why wasn't I worth fighting for before? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I don't have a good answer. I was selfish and scared. I was looking for something to fill a void that had nothing to do with you. You had a choice," I said quietly. "Every step of the way, you had a choice." "I know," she whispered, "and I made the wrong one." Over and over again, we fell into silence once more, the weight of her confession pressing down on us. "Do you love him?" I finally asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "No," she said immediately. "It was never about love. It was about feeling seen, feeling wanted. But it was never real." Her words stung, a reminder of just how disconnected we had become. "I thought we had something real," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But now, I don't know what's real anymore. I want to find out, she said, her hand reaching out tentatively, but stopping short of touching mine. I want to understand where we went wrong and how we can fix it. If we can fix it. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She was exhausted, worn down by the consequences of her actions. But there was a sincerity in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. If we do this, I said slowly, it won't be easy. It won't be quick. And I can't promise I'll ever be able to forgive you. I understand, she replied, a tear slipping down her cheek. I don't expect forgiveness. I want a chance to try. After a long pause, I nodded. Maybe we start with therapy. Not just for you. For both of us. A flicker of hope crossed her face, tentative but present. I'll do whatever it takes, Daniel. I promise. As we sat there, the world around us fading into night, I felt the faintest glimmer of something I thought was lost forever. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was the possibility of rebuilding, of finding our way back to something resembling trust. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way through this darkness together.